Now is the time. With the storm at our backs, they will never see how few we are.
The Swedes charged out of the blizzard and completely overwhelmed the Russians.
Peter, who had all these dreams of making Russia a superb military power, met ignominious defeat. His 34,000 soldiers were trounced by Charles's army of 8,000.
Convinced that Russia was a paper tiger, Charles turned west to attack Poland. He would save Tsar Peter for later.
What Narva did to Peter is to convince him that all of the resources of the vast country which was under his control had to be put to serve one purpose and one purpose only, and that was to build Russia into a military power.
Peter seized bells from Russia's churches and melted them down to make cannon. He jacked up taxes to pay for a military buildup. He drafted 45,000 new troops from Russia's peasant families.
The term of service in the Russian army when people are drafted is 25 years. It's considered a death sentence. And when peasants leave the village to go into the army, they're given essentially a wake. They're treated as though they had died and that they're not coming back.
While Charles and the Swedes were distracted in Poland, Peter's army marched for the sea. By 1703, the Russians had carved out a beachhead on the Baltic, along the shores of the Gulf of Finland. On a boggy island, where the river Neva meets the Gulf, Peter the Great staked his claim.
By nature, we are fated here to cut a window through to Europe. Here shall be a town.
He could have settled in the cities of the Baltics, but no, he had to start a brand new city, and this was significant. It was richly symbolic in that he was creating a new Russia, a new Russian empire, and to essentially be able to start from scratch.
May 1703, the Tsar grabbed an axe and began to build the city he christened St. Petersburg. Never a patient man, Peter wanted his new town to rise as fast as possible. He built his own log house in just 3 days. Peter knew Charles and the Swedes would return and try to force Russia out of the Baltic. He wanted fortresses and fighting ships ready to hurl them back. He wanted a city that Russia would never surrender. He ordered it all built, whatever the cost. Peter drafted thousands of workers to build his new city. Peasants, soldiers, even Swedish prisoners. Often without tools, they dug with their hands. In summer, malaria and mud crippled the work. In winter, ice and scurvy took their toll. Laborers died by the thousands. The Russians would say St. Petersburg was built on bones.
The way that Peter forced the creation, the building of St. Petersburg, also illustrates the steps that he was willing to take to bring Russia into the modern period, to wrench Russia into the modern period.
More than a new city, St. Petersburg was the foundation of a new society. To dramatize the transformation of his realm, Peter would erect a gilded showcase just outside the city, Peterhof. With his new summer palace, the Russian Tsar sought to outdo even the glories of Versailles. Peter's goals, his new city, his new nation, were more important than any Russian life. He uprooted his entire court and commanded them to build new homes in his window on the west. He even told them how and where to build.
Peter's city was really his plaything in a way. I mean, like some kings would line up their soldiers and make them march. He did the same thing, really, with Petersburg and its inhabitants. So the city had a sort of martial character to it from the start.
When Sweden's King Charles heard of Peter's mad rush to build, he scoffed.
Let the Tsar tire himself out with founding new towns. We will keep for ourselves the honor of taking them later.
In 1708, Charles prepared to make good his boast. The battle-tested Swedish army stormed out of Poland and marched for Moscow. Peter answered with fire, a blanket of fire burning everything in the Swedes' path. Wherever Charles attacked, his troops conquered only scorched earth. By the following winter, the mighty Swedish army was trapped deep in Russian territory, hundreds of miles from their supplies, running short of ammunition and food. Peter waited for spring, then sent his rebuilt army, 60,000 strong, to confront Charles's invaders. In July, the Tsar and the King of Sweden faced off outside the Ukrainian town of Poltava. Crippled from wounds, Charles had to be carried onto the battlefield. But even outnumbered nearly 3-1, Sweden's warrior king still ordered his troops to attack. Sweden's first wave hurled the Russians back. Then Peter's artillery opened fire. Russian guns riddled Charles's troops. Russian conscripts drove them back. Peter's new army was simply too big and too well armed. On the killing fields of Poltava, King Charles's reign of glory was drowned in blood and dust. Russia's absolute ruler, Tsar Pyotr Alexeyevich Romanov, would become the new master of the Baltic. Russia was at last a great European power. In 1711, Tsar Peter the Great moved Russia's capital to his triumphant city on the Baltic, St. Petersburg. There was just one problem. The Russian people still considered Moscow the capital. But Peter never let public opinion interfere with his grandiose plans. Peter lived life non-stop. He often traveled over 100 miles a day, in an age when most people might never travel that far in a lifetime. The list of his innovations and reforms seems endless. The first Russian newspaper, the first hospital, the first museum, schools for navigation, geography, mathematics, politics, and astronomy, a new navy, a new army, a new capital. Ultimately, Peter outgrew even his crown. Not content with the old Muscovite title and regalia, Peter ordered a new European-style crown. Then he bestowed on himself a new regal title, not Tsar, but Emperor, autocrat of all the Russias. Still, Pyotr Alexeyevich Romanov had come of age in the shadows of the Kremlin. He had seen palace intrigue destroy powerful men. Now in his 40s, Peter knew that his life's work might be erased at his death.
He really did, I think, have a very long-term vision, and it was very important to him that what he'd done must not be undone. It must be continued.
To guarantee the survival of his new Russia, Peter needed a loyal, capable successor. But Peter's only son, the Tsarevich Alexei, would prove to be the great man's greatest disappointment.
The two could not have been more different. Peter was this giant of a man. He was energetic, he was decisive, and yet his son was short, he was lazy, he was sluggish, he wasn't as bright as his father. It was really quite a disastrous situation.
He wanted to kind of live a life of luxury and disregarded all the training that was necessary to be Peter's heir, and it bothered Peter to no end.
As Alexei reached manhood, Peter berated his son.
You do not make the least endeavors, and all your pleasure seems to consist in staying idle and lazy.
His father essentially tells him, look, you're either going to do it my way or you're going to have to renounce the throne. There's no other way. You have got to prepare yourself to be the ruler as I tell you to.
If you do not mend, I will deprive you of the succession, as one may cut off a gangrenous limb.
For his part, the Tsarevich begged his father to relieve him from the burden of succession.
I do not think myself fit for government. My memory is weak, my body decayed. I do not aspire to the Russian crown.